Welcome to the Luxury Listing Specialist Podcast with Michael LaFido, where top luxury agents reveal their best practices, plus interviews with real estate industry influencers, thought leaders, and luxury marketing experts. You'll come away from each episode with new strategies and tactics to dominate high-end homes in any market. And now for the latest episode of Luxury Listing Specialist. Here's your host, luxury real estate expert, coach, and trainer, Michael LaFido.
Hey everybody, welcome back. It's Michael LaFido. Welcome to the Luxury Listing Specialist Podcast. I'm excited for today's interview. Again, you are at the right place whether you're a newbie agent or a seasoned veteran and you're looking to dominate selling high-end and luxury homes in your respected market. Again, every marketplace is different. It might be $500,000 is the average sale price in your market for high-end homes. In other markets, we just interviewed someone from Beverly Hills where the average there was $4.5 million. So it's all relative, but you are in the right place if you're looking to either break into or dominate selling high-end and luxury homes, because it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that if you sell $1 million home, you get a lot more than selling a $200,000 home. So with that being said, we have Steve Wydler with us today. Steve is he's the co-founder of Wydler Brothers Real Estate out of the greater DC metro area. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you for having me.
You're quite welcome. And again, we from time to time have broker owners. We might have service providers. We might just have Johnny Rockstar, who's a top agent that's using some unique marketing strategies to sell high-end and luxury homes, because most marketplaces, there's a shift from a seller's market to a buyer's market. At some price point, there's a lot of inventory, not a lot of demand. And of course, we call that a buyer's market. So that's probably where I'm going to hit you with first. I know offline you shared with me probably the average price point in your marketplace that you sell, Steve, because you are a broker owner, but you actually sell as well. You said somewhere in the $5 to $550 price point is probably the average sale price for homes in the greater DC metro area. Is that correct?
That's right. That's a subset of the market, but that's sort of my core market. So in my core market, it's about $550.
Okay, in your core market. And in your core market, at what price point do you think it really becomes saturated with properties and it really becomes a buyer's market? At what price point would you say for your core market, Steve?
Well, right now we're in an interesting demographic shift in the DC area. It seems that the home builders have got very excited about the opportunities in our market. So there's been a lot of luxury homes built. Infill housing is what we call it, where a builder will buy a older, 1940s, 1950s, 1960s home, buy it for the land, tear it down, and put up a luxury home. So we are seeing a lot of new supply into the new home segment of the market, and that in this area that really starts at like the 1.2 range and up. So that's where we're seeing a little more of a buyer's market.
Okay, so around 1.2. You talked about when you're landlocked, when you're in an established neighborhood and there's not, big plots of land around. We call that teardowns, right? Where they're knocking down a property, building a new home, correct?
That's right.
Yeah, I was former chief business and marketing officer for a company called Teardowns.com, and that's really what they specialize when the value's in the land. So very, very interesting. So about 1.1. So tell us, I guess we talked before this. So I know you were formerly with a large company, which is known as Long & Foster, and you had one of the top 5 producing teams when you left there at the time. So when you're with a big brokerage and you're going on a listing appointment, for many of these listeners, they're wondering, hey, man, I'm a little afraid of going on one of these big appointments because I don't dominate it yet. What if they ask me this? What if they ask me that? And they what if themselves to death. Well, when you're with a larger company, there's pros and cons to that. Well, you're now with the boutique. So maybe for those listeners that maybe are with the boutique type of office, I'm assuming, Steve, that's an objection that you have to come up against. Maybe you're up against a RE/MAX, a Coldwell Banker, a large national brand. What do you recommend to those listeners, or what do you do that helps overcome that objection, the elephant in the room, so to speak?
That's a great question. So, we the way we handle that is we love to tell our story of how we went from being an individual agent to one of the largest teams in the country to being an independent broker. And through the telling of that story, we're able to really hit what our value proposition is and explain to the prospective client why we're different and why that difference is going to be a benefit to them.
Okay. So unique selling proposition, telling your story. That's what I hear you say, correct?
That's correct.
You know, when I speak and train on national stages, I talk about story sell, right? Be a great storyteller. Now, don't make stories up, right? But be able to articulate your message where your audience, can understand it. I'll never forget when I, was in college, I'd go to this church and the priest at the time would tell some amazing stories and he would make it relative so you could understand it. So, when I'm on listing appointments, I try to figure out what kind of car they drive. So after we get a tour of the home and I see the garage and I see the car, I use a lot of car analogies because I feel like people can relate. So telling a story, building rapport with them, so you have a captive audience is what I hear you saying, correct?
Yeah, you definitely, in any appointment, you want to establish some levels of connection that are outside the business context. So whether it's, where, you grew up in the same general part of the country, or you both like the, a particular sports team, whatever it is, you want to make some connections. Obviously, the more impactful the connections, the better. Sometimes, despite trying, you don't always find the connection. But you want to avoid sort of the resume dump. So there's an art to do it. And with respect to the storytelling, I think you hit the nail on the head. You have to be authentic, and you can't make stuff up. And if you really believe in yourself and you're confident in your abilities, and have a good story, that sort of that passion and that energy will allow the prospective buyer or seller to connect with you easier.
Yeah, I think authenticity is really important. There's other, luxury trainers or certifications out there that say you got to do this, you got to do that. I tell people hogwash. I mean, be authentic. I mean, I got a 19 on my ACT in the time of doing this show. I got 5 properties on the market above 5 million, and it's all relative, Steve. But in the Chicagoland market, that's a high-end property. There were only 3 $5 million properties sell last year. And I tell people, listen, be authentic. You don't have to come from a gated community. You don't have to come from a white collar family. You need to be authentic. You need to be able to articulate what makes you different and unique, or why they should hire your boutique versus a large, or why they should hire your large company, the benefits versus a boutique. It really emphasizes the strengths of what it is you do. And you were talking about sports teams, and I use the term affinity, right? How do you build affinity with your potential clients? So you're a Harley rider, they ride a Harley Davidson. You're a University of Maryland fan, they're a University of Maryland fan, or whatever it might be. Try to build that common connection and do your homework ahead of time. We live in a Google world, we live in a Zillow world. And so before your appointment, do your due diligence. I use the term social media scrub, Steve. I check them out ahead of time so I know what their likes and their interests are, if there's any similar connections. So I'm already prepared for that appointment before the appointment. You've been in the industry, you're a rock star. That's why we got you on the Luxury Listing Specialist podcast. I'm not telling you anything, but is there anything else that maybe you recommend, to build that rapport and differentiate yourself on the listing appointment? Let's just stick to that.
Well, again, I think you hit the nail on the head. You definitely do as much due diligence as you can, and find out, what connections you have through social media. You figure out, you read their bio, do as much research on their home. I like to think that I know more about their home before I walk in it than they do, and that always impresses them. So I research the tax records, the lot quality. In our area, we have something called resource protected area, which means that you might have some restrictions on building in it if you're near a watershed area. And just being able to talk to them about it and show them that you pulled this research and you're going to be able to communicate this and anticipate problems with potential buyers gives them a lot of confidence that you're the right person to be speaking with.
Yeah, owning your numbers, doing your due diligence, showing up differently, articulating your message. These are all things that we recommend with our certification. That's what we train on as well. This is probably a loaded question, and I doubt you'll be able to put your finger on one. But if you were to pinpoint one marketing strategy you find most effective for selling high-end homes, what would you attribute that to, Steve?
Yeah, that is a sort of a tough and tricky question, but I would say it's coordinated communication is how I like to think about it.
Okay.
About our marketing strategy, which is there at any given time there are universe of prospective buyers for the property, and the question is what are you going to do as the listing agent? What strategy do you have to reach those prospective buyers in all the different marketing channels available to you? And so, our view is we want to not only reach all these buyers, but do so in a coordinated fashion, so that they're all finding out about the opportunity at the same time, or as close to that same time as possible. And the more buyers who find out about a property, the more likelihood that they'll feel a sense of urgency and competition. And when buyers feel urgency and competition, the sellers do well. It's when a property is sort of weakly introduced to the marketplace that buyers don't feel a sense of urgency, and they don't feel like they need to come in right away and see it. They can come in 2-3 weeks later, and time works against the seller. So you do want your buyers to feel like they better get off the couch or out of their office and get over there, because they're going to miss out on this opportunity.
Yeah, how do you create urgency when you're in a buyer's market? There's an orchestrated way of doing it, is what I hear you saying. And again, many of these markets that we're talking about, luxury homes, they're stagnant, right? They're stale. They're sitting on the market. And so, what I hear you talk about is how do you create that urgency? I mean, besides red tag sales and pricing it at 50% off. So. Which is probably a natural lead question into when you do have a property, Steve, that you're marketing, you're aggressive, you think outside the box, you talk about marketing. What do you do when you have what I call a stale listing, Steve? Is there a technique that you do, or multiple things? What would let's just role play here. You got a $2 million property, and sitting on the market. There's some tough competition. What do you do, Steve?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it is fairly common that even despite all your efforts to get an offer in the first 30 days, it sits for 6 months or so. The key is to continually keep your finger on the pulse of the market. One of the things I always do when I list a property is I set up a search in my local MLS, and let's say it's a $2 million property, so I might create a search in that vicinity or zip code from 1.5 to 2.5, and I look for everything that went under contract from the date we went on the market going forward, and I keep track and say, there might be 30 active listings in that period, and in 6 months, 6 homes went under contract, so that's 1 a month. So that's a 5. That's a you can calculate the absorption rate from that and determine it's the pace of the market, and then you have to look at each of those listings and try to determine is that what was it about those other properties that were more attractive to those buyers than your property, and is part of this is having good relationships with those agents who are the other listing agents, and find out if maybe did that buyer even come to your listing to look at it. And then the key to all this is then keeping your client informed that you're doing this work, you're on top of it, and seeing if there's anything you can do proactively to to reposition the property so that, to the extent there is some sort of perceived negative about your property as to why buyers are either not showing it or showing it and not making offers, try to fix it. Is the house too dark? Is the furniture dated? Is there too much wallpaper in the house? Is the yard it doesn't feel like it has enough of a flat green area? And some of those things are fixable. Some of them, sometimes they're not. But to the extent they are fixable, you talk to your client and say, is it worth actually making the change? Or sometimes the answer is, maybe it is price. Usually it's a combination of those, but the key is to have to understand the market, follow it. And the hardest thing to do, I think, in this business is to reach out to a client when nothing's happening. And I think that's a fatal error listing agents make, is they're afraid to call their client because they don't have any good news to share. But I think it's much better to let the client know that you haven't forgotten about them, that you're, even though they don't see activity, they don't see the showings, that you're continuing to market the property aggressively.
You nailed a bunch of points there, and I'll just try to recap a few of them. So first off, you talked basically about, I use the term fresh eyes analysis. So take a look at the home. What can we do to position the home more effectively? So whether it be, visually, whether it be wallpaper, whether it be landscaping, and then I also hear you say indirectly, which I talk about all the time as a luxury marketing specialist, we need to accentuate the best features of a home and downplay the least favorable. So you're putting the property out there in its best light. I also heard you say you need to know your competition inside and out, what the market's doing and what your competition has to bring to the table. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. I do my best to preview properties every week. So even if I don't have a buyer for them, it's important that I know what's going on, so that for my listings, I know one of the things we ask when a buyer comes through one of my listings is, what do you think about the property? What else are you looking at? What else have you liked? It just, you hear this information and it helps you sort of, keep track of the pulse of the market.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Two questions I have for you. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think you raise another good point. Is I think it's the listing agent's job to know what are the 2, 3, probably no more than 4. What are those 4 key things that are the biggest selling features of the house, and make sure that your marketing highlights those things. And you can't just have a stock recipe for every listing. How you're gonna write the paragraph, your descriptive paragraph for every listing. You really, you have a very limited amount of words in which to capture someone's attention, and people look for buzzwords. Are you close to a metro? Do you have a flat yard? Do you have an open floor plan with a renovated kitchen? If it is an older home that's fully remodeled, you have to make sure that the buyers know it's fully remodeled, because a lot of buyers, they want new. But the fully remodeled might keep them there that extra second to click on a few more pictures to see if it's worth their time. So it's a listing agent's job to know what buyers in their market are looking for.
That's a good point. One question I have for you, and you might not know the answer to this question, so guesstimate if you had to. What percent of the time on a property, I'm not talking about you, I'm talking about market. Steve, in your marketplace, what percent of the time when a deal closes, is there no other agent involved? So I'm not necessarily talking about dual agency, because some listeners they can't do dual agency, but what percent of the time on a property that sells in your marketplace, if you had to guess, or if you know the number, is you're the only agent involved, or the listing agent's the only agent involved?
So in our market, that can happen one of two ways. It can be a dual agent where the same agent represents both the buyer and the seller, and that is permitted in 2 of our 3 jurisdictions with consent. The other way that happens is through where one side elects to go unrepresented. So the listing agent is performing what we call ministerial acts, not advising the buyer, but just sort of helping them. I like to say they're sort of a scribe to the transaction, but they shouldn't be giving any advice to the buyer, because in so doing, they are violating their fiduciary obligations to the seller. In our market, that's about, it's not common. It's less than 5% of homes, even in the luxury market, are sold that way. I will say there are some agents that, I don't know how to say this politely, but they engineer it so they have a much higher likelihood of having that situation happen with their listings than the general.
What I hear you saying is they don't have the seller's best interest in mind, but personal best in mind, which, of course, in my opinion, is an ethical violation.
I believe that they're doing their seller a disservice by engineering it that way.
Enough said.
I'm sure a lot of them think that they're being fully ethical and there's no harm, no foul. But I share your belief in that regard. In fact, my brother and I wrote a book about that very topic.
Did you? What was the name of it?
The name of the book is Inside the Cell.
Inside the Cell. That's awesome. Good name of the book. And I think I talked about this, but maybe I didn't. Again, about 70% of your business is on the list side, 30% is buy side. Your average sale price for the listeners is around 1.3. You do about 35, 36 million consistently. I always just like to, share that. But you also run an office, and you're growing a boutique office, which requires a lot of your time, hand holding, that sort of thing. Another question that I always like to hear, it's all relative to the marketplace. By the way, in my market, 9% of the time last year, homes were represented with only one agent involved. So where does that come into play, Steve? When I'm talking with the seller, I tell them, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, hire the best agent, the best marketer, someone that's going to position your home most effectively locally and globally. Because statistically, for you, you might say 5%, but for me, I say 9% of the time, whoever you hire is going to bring the buyer directly. And so let me put it to you another way, Mr. Seller, 91%, or in your case, Steve, 95% of the time, that buyer is going to come from another agent. So, the two oldest tricks I think that a lot of traditional Debbie Dinosaur agents use and tell sellers is, number one is tell them what they want to hear. Tell them a price to get the listing, which is doing them in service and being unethical because you're lying, not being truthful. And number two is, quite honestly, hey, I have a buyer. Tell them that you have a buyer. So what, Steve? They interview me, they interview you, and I tell them, hey, I have a buyer, hire me, and they decide to go with you. Am I not going to bring that buyer anymore? I mean, that's like the oldest, falsehood in the business. But don't even get me going there. That's why we started the Luxury Listing Specialist podcast, to bring more value to the agents, to the broker owners, because unfortunately, there are a lot of negative thoughts about agents out there. I think Reader's Digest in 2012 had real estate agents as the 36 most trusted professionals. We were just above sex workers, which that's a whole nother topic. But my point is, we're not really looked at in high regards as being trustworthy. Not you or me, of course, but we as an industry. Matter of fact, in my marketplace, in the Chicagoland market, we have 16,401 real estate agents in my real estate board. And they came out with the data recently. Last year, 59% of those 16,401 agents, Steve, sold 0 homes. 59%.
Right. Yep.
I mean, probably not much different in your greater DC metro area, is it?
I think that's similar. It's definitely over 50% don't sell.
Yeah. So that's our competition. I will tell those of you that are looking to break into it, the good news is this is a people business. People don't care how much Steve and I know until they know we care. You got to build rapport. And whenever I represent a seller on a luxury property, I always ask the buyer's agent, hey, out of curiosity, how did you meet with your buyer? And many times it's, hey, I'm friends with their family, or this. It's not, hey, I'm marketing, or I bought this internet lead. So the good news for you that are listening is it is a people business. And I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. Do you attend your showings? At what price point in your marketplace, out of curiosity, is the listing agent must accompany?
It varies. There is sort of a tension. At any price point, you do want to. I say that agents are inherently lazy, and so the more obstacles you put in front for them to show a property, the less likely it is to be shown. but there's certain properties that definitely, because of their sort of hidden features and some of the song features aren't as obvious, that you really want to have an agent there. And then also some of the properties are, you get to a price point where there's just the client expects it, and I think rightfully so. They just have a lot of valuable art and valuables in the property, and you want to make sure that the family shows that they don't have crazy kids running around, jumping on furniture, knocking over stuff. But I would say, about for appointment only, we call it here. It's probably 1.5 and up. We sometimes consider it, but I'd say only like half of our 1.5 and up we would do appointment only. We usually do a hybrid, which is you'd say call first lister, where they would call the listing agent, and we would try to vet them and see, and if at all possible, we will meet them there. But if that's not possible, I'd rather them confirm that they're going to take care of the property, and I know the agent that they're going to be respectful, and then I'd rather them see it without me than not see it at all, if that makes sense.
Sure.
And I have three people who, including myself, who support myself. So when we do have appointment only, it's going to be one of three people, and they're all always fully knowledgeable about the property.
Okay, and proof of funds, do you require it before showing? And at what price point do you require it?
That's actually fairly rare. I just showed I'm showing a $4 million property this week, and the agent asked for proof of funds, and that is, even at that price point, it's fairly unusual.
Okay.
Because by virtue of their going through the agent, in our market, the agents are usually, it's not a good use of their time to show properties where their clients aren't qualified for. But again, that does happen, but it's not that often here.
Okay.
If I get a cold buyer, however, who's unrepresented, I will ask. I won't show the property until I have some sort of confirmation that they're qualified.
Sure. Fair enough. Many of these agents on the call, maybe they're not consistently, marketing the high-end luxury properties, and so that's a common question we ask. If it's a real high-end property, I put it right on the multiple listing service, right in the agent remarks. Proof of funds required, because what I can tell you is you don't want to ask one person for it and not somebody else, because if one's a protected class, they might think you're steering, or hey, you asked, this guy, I'm Italian, so I'll pick on me. You asked this guy who's got an Italian last name for proof of funds, but you didn't ask this other guy. You know what I mean? So you have to be consistent, whatever you do.
I always ask my Italian buyers for proof of funds.
Thank you. So Steve, first off, if somebody has a referral or they want to get a hold of you, out that DC, Maryland, Virginia marketplace, what's the best way they can get a hold of you?
Oh, thank you for asking. So the two easiest ways to reach me are my email, which is steve@wydlerbrothers.com, which is my first name, Steve, and the name of our company, Wydler Brothers, which is spelled W-Y as in yellow, D as in David, L-E-R, Brothers, because I have the pleasure and privilege of working with my brother each and every day.
That's awesome.
And yes, there's maybe a hint of sarcasm in that, but
yeah.
We do get along, but we are brothers, so we do get in our have our battles here and there. And the other way is my phone. And so like any good realtor, my phone is by my hip 24/7, and that number is 703-346-6326. Again, 703-346-6326. And like any good realtor, you always learn to say your telephone number twice.
That's awesome. Yes, absolutely. Repeat yourself 3 times if necessary.
Right.
Well, good. Well, listen, I really appreciate your time. You gave some really good nuggets here. Keep doing your thing. I love the fact that you guys stepped out of your comfort zone, you and your brother. And that's where the magic happens for those listeners, is when you do step out of your comfort zone. And that's what you guys did with starting your boutique. So, if we can be supportive of you anyway, let us know. Keep doing what you're doing. I really appreciate it. And again, for those listeners, make sure you check in and tune in periodically. You can always go to luxury luxurylistingpodcast.com for the most recent, or you can find us on iTunes and Stitcher. My name is Michael LaFido. I'm the founder of the Luxury Listing Specialist certification. You can go to luxurylistingspecialist.com for more information. So again, if you're looking to break into and dominate selling high-end and luxury homes, that's, I would say, the first step in my mind where you should go. Proven content, proven principles, and more importantly, it works. So with that being said, remember, it's not the market, it's the marketing. My name is Michael LaFido. Thank you for your time, and thank you, Steve. Hey there, it's Michael LaFido. Thanks again for listening to our podcast. If you are interested in signing up for our Luxury Listing Specialist certification, or if you want additional information on how you can dominate selling higher-end homes in your marketplace, make sure you go to luxurylistingspecialist.com.